Hello everyone, this is Emily Wright, Tech Editor and Head of Special Projects at EG, and I'm joined by somebody else based here in the UK as well, Bill Hughes, Head of Real Assets at Legal and General Investment Management. How are you doing, Bill? How's it going?
Yeah, good, thanks Emily. Thanks for having me and great to be here.
We're here to talk about business and technology and real estate and all the things that you hold very close to you in your role. But before we get into all of that, how are you? How are you finding lockdown? And how has it been from a personal perspective, but also a business perspective as well?
Yeah, I think everyone has been relatively disorientated by all of this, and I would count myself in that too. I think the separation of work life and home life is tougher, and I think we probably all adapt in different ways. I've found exercise. I get into my Lycra and get on the bike and cycle around London at least every day, and that gives me the opportunity to get some exercise and some fresh air and step away from work for a bit. But it's tough because we've all been thrown into remote working in a way that none of us perhaps expected. And so it's been a challenge to all of us, really.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to hear that, the exercise is helping, and I'm certainly finding that too. And it is such a strange time, isn't it? And it's why we're doing this the way we're doing it, but aren't we lucky that we can do it the way we can do it and also stay connected? And of course, this isn't just something that's going to be going out in the UK and Europe, but across the world and North America. So can we just start off, because we'll have lots of viewers from all over the world and lots of people tuning in, just get a bit of an overview of the business, how things are going, but also how it kind of all fits in and on the real estate side and also the technology side as well.
Yeah, so the business I work for, Legal and General Investment Management, has around about £1 trillion under management. In a range of asset classes. Much of that is in the capital markets. The piece of the business I run, called Real Assets, has got around about 35 billion assets under management. And we think about investment opportunities as being within the totality of the built environment. That's not narrowly defined by real estate at all. It's the totality of the environment within which society operates. And so that's what we do. If you invest directly, as we do, you have an opportunity to influence and control what you invest in. And where technology comes into that is, I think, the capacity to have insightful information and data that allows you to be responsive to your assets can make you, with that you can stay ahead. With that you can really be better at owning the built environment than if you didn't have that insight.
I know from many chats that I've had with you in the past that you have really championed a very sort of honest and open approach to addressing the way that the world and real estate and the built environment is changing. Could you talk to me a little bit more about that approach? It's something that I've always been really interested in hearing you speak about. I think we met once and you said, I think sometimes it's okay and actually quite important to say, well, at this point, we don't necessarily know what the next stage is, but we know that we do have to address change. So could you give me a bit more information about that? Because I think it's a very interesting approach.
Yeah, look, I think I'm in a sector in real assets and very much real estate as well, where there's been many people over the years that have been looking to protect the status quo, maybe because they've got a vested interest, maybe because they're unambitious. And we know that the world is moving apace. Technology is clearly part of that. And so I feel the need, the obligation, the responsibility to look forward and to challenge ourselves. I think everything is challengeable. I think that's what will make us a good business, but also makes us more likely to be relevant to the people that we're here to serve. And really the built environment is simply the environment within which humans exist. And so we have got to challenge ourselves. as the years roll past. That feels instinctively the right thing to do. And by the way, the capital that I'm responsible for looking after, by and large, is pension fund money or savings of people who live in society. So, of course, it would be entirely coherent for me to do the very best I can and make sure that what we do is relevant, has an impact on better quality of life, is capable of making society improving rather than stagnating.
There's 2 points there that I want to pick up on. The first is your mention of responsibility. And your second, I have a construction site next door and they've just started, so bear with us. But the first one was your mention of responsibility. And your second point was, how you were talking about, that everything being very human, which is something that more and more people are talking about, and I like to hear, particularly in real estate, people are talking about that human element of what it is that is done day in, day out in this sector. It's not just about bricks and mortar. But let's start with responsibility. That's a really powerful word to use when talking about addressing change. Can you tell me a bit more about how that responsibility manifests itself in you personally?
Yeah, I'm lucky enough to be running a business that's got a large amount of assets under management. I talk to government and other influencers a lot of the time, but I'm only really here because I happen to get this particular role at a point in time. And so I take the responsibility that comes with that seriously. I don't think for a moment that anyone in my sort of role can be complacent. I think it's absolutely part of why I do what I do to really seek to influence things for the better. And yeah, that for me, that just goes with the territory. That's how I see it. Legal in general, as an organisation, would say it has a social conscience, that it is here to make a positive impact, and all of us feel that. And as it happens, you've got a better chance of doing what's right for your customers if you see the world that way.
Mm. And then this idea of everything being very human, and now more than ever, in the situation that we all find ourselves in, that approach to people and the human impact and everything that goes beyond bricks and mortar has never been more important. And obviously it's something that has been very important to you for quite some time. I'm wondering whether you're noticing more of a focus on the human side of things, which really is reimagining real estate, I think, and whether you'd like to see even more of that happening, and whether indeed, this is 3 questions in one, and whether you think we will see more of that after the situation that we've all been put through. So are you noticing it within the industry, and do you think we're going to see more of it off the back of this situation?
Yes, the pandemic has been an interesting experience in terms of learning lessons in all sorts of ways. But I would say that in the run-up to the end of 2019, for roughly that decade post-global financial crisis, the industry that I'm in has been beginning to work harder to figure out how can it produce what people in society really want to see, as opposed to be, arrogantly sitting in offices and not really paying attention, or being egotistical architects or designers of buildings that will be obsolete. There's much more of a recognition that we've got to do something that's useful and make a positive contribution. So I think that's been happening in any event. And I suppose it has really focused a lot of people's minds on how do people adapt, how do people in the environment that they live in. We've got all sorts of news about transport being seen as being risky, physical proximity being something that one can't take for granted, how retail space operates. There are a whole range of new challenges. So in a way, it's an obligation, an opportunity to reinvent how we do things. But you have to start with what works for people.
That point you're making about things becoming a lot more human is so interesting. And I think we have seen, and it's been great to see in the real estate sector, much more of a focus on that human element. It's obviously something that you find very important, have done for some time. Have you noticed, everybody kind of sort of beginning to get their heads around that? And do you think the situation that we're currently in, one that has really made everybody very much focus on not just themselves but everybody else, do you think that it's going to really sort of act as a catalyst for that approach to real estate from a much more human angle?
Yes, I mean, I would say that in the world post global financial crisis, so really from 2008 onwards, I think there's been a much greater recognition that people who invest in the built environment have got to think harder about what works for society. There's really much less room for just being overtly about making profits or building architectural projects for ego, and we have a role to play in society, and we'll be judged for that. So I think there's been something going on really for the past just 10, 12 years or so. The pandemic, of course, has made everyone think hard about what works for people, what works for communities, what works for individuals, be it their personal life or their work life. So, of course, we have a whole range of additional challenges to face up to: the use of public transport, the appropriateness or otherwise of buildings, certainly to tackle the residential housing supply shortage, that the built environment is fit for purpose in the future. We have a lot of work to do, but it's got to start with thinking about what works for the people in society rather than the professionals and what they might want to do with the decisions they're making. And they have to start with people.
Thank you very much. Now let's move on to talk about sort of the tech side of the business and how you've kind of operated that and what your approach has been, and then sort of broaden that out, because I know that your approach to tech is broad and it isn't just about, certain platforms and technologies themselves, but it's much wider. It's about the way we live, which really plays into all the stuff that you've already been saying and talking about, really. But you have a track record of investing in rather than just adopting certain technologies and platforms to really support them. I mean, WideScore connectivity rating system is a great example of that. You guys have been huge supporters of WideScore. So could you talk a bit more about that commitment and, why you feel that's such an important approach?
Yeah, so I think Legal and General is in an unusually strong position with regard to investing in tech. And I think, on the one hand, as a user of tech, we're looking for ways to address problems and solutions for our business. And on the other hand, we can invest in technology where we see, as a user, that there is a real value to that technology. So we can do both. WideScore is a case in point where we invested in the company, but really because we'd already worked out that would as a measure and a benchmark of connectivity, that would be a useful thing for us to be doing. So I think that's how we are going to continue to approach the world. We have the opportunity to accelerate progress in a number of areas, and I do think that the goal really is to identify where there is a need and where there's a technology that's really addressing that, rather than think that tech for its own sake is necessarily a good thing. We are really very much trying to figure out how we can identify problems that need solutions, and then using tech to help us with that.
I mean, I think that we've spoken about this in the past, and it's very encouraging, I think, for people to hear that and to see what you do and to see that commitment and that ability to invest in tech. And as you say, the ability to support and sort of push forward technologies where you see there being a great opportunity and a solution to a problem. We live in a world which is fueled by technology and by the built environment, and the built environment again fueled by technology. And so I think that's absolutely right to have that very broad vision. But there are real estate companies that maybe aren't quite there yet. So could you talk to me about that? Tell me where that vision comes from and how it manifests itself, and how you see technology and the kind of breadth of that definition.
Yeah, so I think the approach that we have here is we're trying to figure out how will society exist in the future.
So the other thing I wanted to talk to you about was your definition of technology. It's not a narrow definition, which I think is really important. The world we live in is fueled by technology, and the built environment is fueled by technology. So I'd be really interested to find out a little bit more about that definition and, you know, the breadth of it from your perspective and from the business's perspective as well.
Yeah. So Emily, the way I think about that is we're really trying to figure out how society will exist in the future, and we're trying to modernize the business we have that invests over the long term. And of course, technology is part of that in terms of a narrow definition, but I'm also thinking about how we capitalize upon other trends we see. So for example, electric vehicles are inevitable, and we saw that coming relatively early on and made an investment in a company called PodPoint. And we're in the process of rolling out electric charging points across our portfolio because I think it's inevitable that electric cars will be a bigger part of the future. That's technology in its widest sense, I think, and that will make a difference to how our portfolio stays relevant.
And, you know, I think that even broader than that, so we're going from, you know, technology in terms of maybe the sort of very traditional and narrow approach to it through, you know, platforms and systems and, you know, building data and all that kind of stuff, all very important, to what you're talking about there, which is much more sort of smart cities and infrastructure based. But it's even broader than that, I think, and you know, I know that this is important to you, that there's more to the business than any of this really, and that you are very dedicated to, you know, investing with a social conscious. You've got an approach to net zero that you're very proud of, and we talked, I think, already about the focus on people. But could you talk to me a bit about that, about the social conscience side of things and the approach to net zero, and how that ties in with this whole approach to being more forward thinking and really sort of digital transformation, I think.
Yeah. So if you think about how the government would look at the investment proposition for the next 10 years to 2030, the next 30 years to 2050, there is a massive funding shortfall in terms of getting to net zero. And the single biggest solution to that will be for private capital to be invigorated and excited about what can be done, but be there to be making the right decisions about future investment. So decarbonisation really is an obligation, and anyone who's making investment decisions on behalf of medium long-term capital has got to think about that. That's not a choice we're making. I would say that's an obligation, because the climate crisis, the challenge we face, not just around policy, but the reality of global warming, is something that is number one on the list of things to be worried about. So it fits very naturally within the business we're making long-term decisions within to be thinking about that front and centre. From an investment point of view, if we don't think that way, we will end up with assets that become obsolete or stranded, and then we will have investors that are not getting what they require from their investment decisions.
And I'm really interested to sort of get a sense from you as well, because we spoke about it earlier, as to how you think life and business is going to look pre and post pandemic. It's everything that you've talked about, everything that your business is dedicated to, everything that you were doing before the pandemic and everything you'll be doing after the pandemic. As you say, it all links into people, which is the most important thing. And I'm just really interested to know how you see those two sides of this extraordinary moment in time being different. And the construction next door and opposite now both started at the same time. So I'm going to hand over to you. I'm sure it'll be much quieter where you are.
Yeah, I mean, I think the health and well-being of people is becoming more of a consideration. I think equality in society is becoming a more overt consideration, and I would say that the way in which decision makers like LNG operate has been evolving against the background of those things, but also, as I mentioned before, the sense of urgency that now exists around climate change. So all of those things are coming together, and I think what really is happening is that the distance between decision makers about investment and the individuals affected by those decisions is growing much closer together. The difference is narrowing. We have an obligation really now to think about what will make a positive difference to the individuals in society, and those individuals will hold us to account for what we do. There really is no longer the room for there being so much of them and us in society. I think there's much more an overt attempt to level things within society. That might be geographically, it's certainly within different strands of society. And I think LNG's seen that for some time. We've been on that journey for really several years. And I think the pandemic has heightened everyone's awareness of that, but it hasn't changed anything. It was already happening.
Well, thank you so much. And I just wanted to finish really by asking you if you had one message to leave our audience with today, either based on what you've already said, something you wanted to highlight, or something new that you wanted to add, what would that message be?
I think the message would be that everyone should hold the investment decision makers to account for what they're doing at the moment, because we all have a huge responsibility to ensure that we have a society that has the right built environment within which to be productive and fair. And we need to think hard about the climate change crisis as we make decisions today.
Thank you very much. Well, it is a new age and a new normal, and we've done this sessions today with planes flying over, construction work happening. There was actually delivery at my house halfway through, which I didn't mention, but it's quite amazing, you know, what we can achieve in this very new environment. So, Bill, thank you so much for joining me today.
Welcome.